Hey D-Bag. Did you watch all of the great success enjoyed by the University of Kansas men's basketball team on television last night? You know that I did because I am a huge fan of college basketball. It's just unfortunate that the Big 12's last-place team from Texas Tech was so unprepared to challenge Kansas. The Red Raiders looked like they couldn't tell the difference between a basketball and a grapefruit. Ha! It looked to me more like KU was playing so awesome that they might as well have invented the game. Once again, we at KU should be favored by all the experts to win the national championship. All should fear us. Actually, I think there are many teams which should be favored ahead of Kansas this year. KU lost to a Davidson team which has lost to terrible teams like UMass, College of Charleston, and Charlotte. Meanwhile, Kentucky and Syracuse each started 25-1, and those losses were on the road against teams that have been ranked this year. In fact, did you know that the KU staff has been layering the court at Allen Fieldhouse with newspaper? No. Why would they do that? Because the Jayhawks always look better on paper. We've heard this charade before about KU going deeper into the tournament before teams like VCU, Bradley, Bucknell, Northern Iowa, Rhode Island, and Arizona all bit them in the ass. As a matter of fact, I think we at the University of Missouri could definitely go deeper than Kansas in the tournament this year. Ha ha ha. You can make fun of all those upset losses if you like, but they were only considered upsets because KU is so great. They should of course then be favored over Missouri because Mizzou has never even made the Final Four. KU has made the Final Four so many times I don't even know how many times it has happened because I can't count that high. But I do know KU has won the national championship 5 times, so Mizzou can go suck on a big fat mama's tit. Actually, it's a common misconception among KU fans that they've won 5 championships because they have banners which say they won the national championship in 1922 and 1923. In actuality, there was no NCAA tournament back then and there were no polls to determine a champion. KU was only given retroactive titles for those seasons 20 years later when the Helms Foundation awarded a single champion for several previous years. Those titles are definitely disputable and so they've really only won 3 titles. Whatever. You're just pissed off that Mizzou never got any gift-wrapped ex post facto titles. That isn't quite the case. Years later, a deeper set of research was done to make an entire set of rankings over those years instead of merely recognizing one team. In this Primo Powerata poll, Mizzou finished number 1 twice, including 1922 to give them the title over the Helms champion Kansas. And yet you don't see Mizzou trying to claim 2 national basketball championships. Those rankings were clearly done years later by some bitter asshole of a Missouri fan trying to compensate. That statement would be more true in the reverse. The Primo Powerata poll was done by a team of guys, whereas the Helms title was determined by one guy. His name was Bill Schroeder, and he just so happened to be an invitee to many KU basketball reunions. In reality, Mizzou was just as deserving. In 1922, the year they each have a retroactive title, Mizzou and KU each had the same conference record and beat each other on the road once. But Mizzou had the better scoring margin in games among common opponents. You may have been better that year, but I think considering KU's superior basketball history, we would have been favored to beat you if there had been a tournament that year. Well, if my aunt had balls, she would be my uncle. What is that supposed to mean? It means, what if, doesn't matter. Mizzou challenged KU to a rubber match in Kansas City that season and KU refused to play. So it's your fault that we will never know how that game would have turned out. Fine. You can have that year. We are still the greatest program in the history of ever. And you've never made it to the Final Four. Those statements are both circumstantial. First, it's hard to say KU is better than Kentucky, Duke, UCLA, Indiana, and North Carolina when each of those schools has won more national championships than KU. 4 of them have been to more Final Fours, 3 have been to more NCAA tournaments, 3 have more conference tournament championships, and 2 have a better overall winning percentage. Not to mention that KU was extremely fortunate in 2 of their championship runs. In 2008 they didn't have to play anyone higher than an 8 seed in their region. And in 1988 when they were a 6 seed, the 1, 2, and 3 seeds all got knocked out before KU had to play them, and then the Final Four was practically at home in Kansas City. Mizzou was also a 6 seed that year. Maybe if they had been in KU's region, they would have gone on to win it. Well, if my aunt had balls, she'd be my niece, okay? Anyway. Secondly, Mizzou likely would have gone to the Final Four if it had been offered in the early years. And when they did finally get invited to the very first tournament's round of 8, they couldn't go because of travel expenses during the Depression. Ha ha ha. Mizzou was too poor to go the tournament. There you go with your classic elitist attitude. Anyway, Mizzou was replaced that year with the conference's second-place team, Oklahoma, who won their first game and thus advanced to the Final Four. So it's likely that if the Tigers had showed up, they would have gone to the Final Four. But I digress. That's just a matter of ants having balls again. Those are just excuses. Kansas has an outstanding basketball program, and although you would think they would have won more championships with all their great players, they did do a great job in 1988 to win the last 3 games against teams that had beaten them at home earlier in the year. And don't you forget it. We are superior to Missouri in all things. That is ridiculous. Not including individual style athletics for which all-time series results aren't tabulated, KU holds the all-time series lead over Mizzou in only basketball. In fact, KU would have to beat Mizzou at least 65 consecutive times just to even up the series in baseball. They would have to do the same 20 consecutive times in softball and 19 consecutive times in volleyball, which is a sport KU hasn't even beaten Central Missouri in more than 6 out of 17 total meetings. The soccer series between Mizzou and KU is tied, but the Tigers have the better record all time against all opponents, which they also do in many other sports. In fact, Mizzou has made it to the NCAA College World Series 12 times in baseball and softball while KU has only made it twice. The Tigers also lead KU in those sports in NCAA tournament appearances 36-15 and in conference titles 18-3. In other words, Missouri has been dominant over Kansas the majority of the time, exemplified by the all-sports border showdown which Missouri has won 7 of the last 9 years. I think you just memorize stuff about sports which nobody cares about. Why don't you talk about a sport people actually follow? Like football, where we have won a BCS bowl and you haven't even been invited to one. You're a dumbass for even bringing that up. Everyone knows that was a farce and that Mizzou deserved the invite that year because they were ranked higher, finished higher in the conference standings, and beat KU head-to-head in a game that the Tigers controlled the whole way. Yes, you were clearly better than us, but we still got the invite because the BCS believed our fan base would be more supportive, thus generating more revenue. And it's true. Our fans kick ass. Your fans are fair-weather fans. Only 3 years in school history have you averaged more than 45,000 per game. 2007 was one of those years, but you averaged less than 45,000 per game in your first 5 home games that season before you realized you were any good and finally sold out your last 2. Mizzou fans meanwhile have averaged at least 52,000 per game every year since 1997, have broken the record for most fans at College Game Day in 2010, and broke the attendance record for their bowl game that year. KU however averaged even less than 40,000 per game every year from 1997 through 2006. Average attendance is not a fair comparison. Your stadium is bigger than ours,